Hello everyone, it's been a minute since I last posted a video, and today I'm continuing the Where Are You Now series, in which I sit down with professionals and speak to them about how they got to where they are today. In today's episode, I am joined by Zoe Andrews, a biomedical scientist working in microbiology, something which is far, far away from my comfort zone of hematology and blood transfusion. Zoe became a biomedical scientist through what many would describe as a non-traditional route. So we'll have a chat about that and some of the other things that she has going on in her life. Zoe, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for asking.
We've met in person just the once, and it was at IBMS Congress many, many years ago. And it was in the student session I presented a little talk about my journey on becoming a biomedical scientist, and we had a chat after that. And this was back in what, 2019 was it?
Yeah, it would be, a long time ago.
Tell us a little bit about your journey in becoming a biomedical scientist. What motivated you to pursue this career at this point in your life?
Um, it wasn't just at this point in my life. So what happened was I had my son very young and he was quite early. And when I'd had him, he was unwell. And they said to me that he had strep B. And nobody had warned me what strep B was in my pregnancy. And I had no idea um, why it was making him ill. And all they could tell me was, oh, the lab tests. The lab test came back on him. The lab test came back from your placenta, and this is why he's got all these drips and lines. And then that just sort of led to me researching and reading. But then when I looked at what you needed to sort of get into the line of work, whilst I was already in a job that was a well-paying job, it wasn't an option. Bringing up a child when you're like 21, paying for childcare, the thought of going back to university whilst you're in quite a well-paying job it wasn't an option. So I couldn't actually pursue lab work for another 8 years until I actually got redundancy from my role. And then I looked into lab work and I started as what I don't even think they use the term MLA anymore, but I started as an MLA in a laboratory in the UK, and I also did on-call mortuary for a bit of extra money alongside whilst I figured out, well, could I manage to go to university? Could I raise a child? And I had another child by this point. And then in the end, my husband was offered a job here in Guernsey in the Channel Islands. So I'd already started like an open uni degree just to pursue my interest in microbiology because I couldn't get to work in the microbiology lab. It was sort of ring fenced in the laboratory that I was in. It was very hard to get into microbiology. So we moved to Guernsey and I applied for a lab tech job here, and that's sort of when my journey started. And I started with an access course to actually get onto a degree because I actually dropped out of college twice when I was in my teenage years.
Sure. So, it must have been quite a shock for you to discover that your child had strep when they were born. Did you know much about it at the time, or was it all completely alien?
Nothing. It was completely alien. I just remember we were in the NICU, like the ICU for babies, because he was 9 weeks early. And I was totally out of it because I'd had a 4-day labour. And I just remember the consultant trying to explain to me why my like little action man doll sized child had these like plastic splints on 2 arms and like loads of wires and everything. So I was just like, I couldn't comprehend and I couldn't understand.
Sure. So, what was it like trying to study while you were balancing the responsibility of parenting with two children at this time now, you said?
Um, a little bit surreal. And now looking back, I don't even know actually how I did it without even. I mean, there was a lot of points where I was thinking that I would have to take a break. Like, I can't do this. I need a year and I can't do it. But I don't genuinely know how now, thinking back. Just lots of late nights. And I sort of feel a bit of mum guilt looking back, thinking about did I miss have I missed anything that I should have been more present for? Because I think I was always counting down to get to the end of it, to get to the end of it, and I wasn't actually really that present.
How long was this access course that you were doing?
The access course was a year, and then the actual degree was 4 years. And because I was so stressed about, oh, and then after that, I've got to do my portfolio and it'll be forever. So I actually contacted the IBMS and then found the pathway of if you were like already like on a degree course and part-time distance learning, you could start your portfolio, which was insane, but I did my portfolio at the same time.
So it was a full plate at the time. You had a lot going on.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned the challenges that you had, the late nights, and I think it just goes to show sometimes when we look back, it may seem impossible, and you amaze yourself at what you've achieved. I think you've come a great way, and you've come a long way from where you started off. And it just goes to show that even though there were difficult times, and the times when you were thinking, how am I going to get through this? You got through it.
Mm, yeah. It's resilience, isn't it? I think when you want something really badly, you will strive to try and get it. It was a good personal journey though, because I think almost at the beginning, I felt like I was doing it to prove to other people that I was worthy, that I could do it, and I don't know why. And then towards the end of it, I was like, oh, I only actually ever had anything to prove to myself.
And when did you reach that realization? And what made you reach that realization?
Probably when I became brave enough to go private and seek a diagnosis for ADHD because I was trying to learn about myself and why my brain works the way it worked and why certain modules would really stick in my head and certain modules wouldn't.
How did you overcome those challenges, and were there any specific strategies you used or any support system that you had which helped you during this time?
No, it was lonely. I think I just leaned on my family, really, and I think I was a little bit embarrassed because
Yourself and your husband, really.
yeah, and my parents, we moved my parents over after COVID, um, and so they helped quite immensely in it, me being able to work and with the kids. Um, but yeah, it was a little bit lonely because you don't want to go around shouting about it. I didn't really tell anybody that I was going for a diagnosis. I just decided to do it because it had been bugging me for so long.
And when you got that diagnosis, how did that change things for yourself personally, and how you felt, the community would see you as well, your friends, your family?
Um, uni were great. They were really really good. Um, straight away they were offering me extra time for like the online invigilated exams, and they apologised that they couldn't have gone back. I'd already done most of my degree, and it never occurred to me that I could have told them before I got the label. Um, but I said to them, it never really occurred to me, that sort of support was there because I just sort of put that support idea is what I've fought for my children, almost like I don't deserve it. Um, so it was really strange. It was really strange, and I don't really talk about it much at work. Although some people do come and speak to me, and I'm helping someone at the moment with theirs. But um, yeah, there's still a bit of a stigma, and especially when you're older, it's almost like you only expect younger people um to have it or to talk about it or to say that, yeah. So that there's still a lot of work to do, I think.
Yeah, we'll come on to this topic a little bit later in more detail about, um, some of the misconceptions about it and why people only talk about it you only know about it in younger people. I'm very ignorant of this fact myself, so I can put my hands up and say I don't know much about this personally. And most of the people that I know with ADHD tend to be younger people. I don't know many adults at all who have it,
Yeah.
or maybe they have it and I just don't know. I'm not aware, or maybe they don't feel comfortable sharing. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. But you mentioned the support that universities provided. And I think most universities provide that support. Sometimes you just have to ask,
Mm.
and they'll be willing to share. Um, but before we get onto the support, how did you know, or what did you feel that made you want to get the diagnosis, if you see what I mean?
I think probably what people would say were my quirks, and then also knowing about neurodiversity for many years with both children. And you sort of like GPs, especially with women with ADHD, GPs are very quick to give out antidepressants and say that you have depression or you have a mood disorder or you've got really bad anxiety, and actually it's none of them, because actually they're not trained well enough to spot it in females, but they're very well, they're more used to males, but that's because most, if not all, research on ADHD is on male candidates.
I think it's a pattern in healthcare in general, isn't it?
Yeah,
Healthcare skewed towards the males, and I was reading an article in the BBC a couple of days ago about a mother who went to the hospital to have a baby checked because of some rashes on the skin, and the hospital then reported her to the police. Because of her ethnic background, they were just, normal skin markings, but the hospital thought there was something else, and so they reported her. I think, this is something that we need to work on in healthcare because it's skewed towards fairer skin and males in general. A lot
yeah,
of things that, a lot of studies, a lot of uh, medical textbooks all refer to, its focus is on males and people with fairer skin, and that causes issues for people who try to access healthcare, and they don't always get the service that they need. Touch briefly on you started university later on in your
yeah,
life compared to when most people do. So some people go to college and they start university straight after.
yeah.
So how do you think your experience differed as an adult, or a adult learner, I should say, sorry, from what you imagine it would have been if you'd gone to university right after school?
I genuinely don't think that I could have managed at a younger age. Um, and also, I think that because I was older, I had no fear in asking questions. I think if I had have been younger, I wouldn't have asked as many questions, because I think when I was younger, I was always worried about what people thought about me. Do I look stupid asking this question? So because I am was older, I felt like I had nothing to lose, which ultimately is probably a really good feeling to have if you're on a learning journey, because you're all in.
Yep, and you're doing it for yourself. You don't care what anyone else thinks about. If I ask that stupid question, what are the other people sitting in that lecture going to think about me? You're doing it because you want to know, and it's for your own benefit at the end of the day. We
It's
think people realize quite late on.
But it was really funny because I ended up figuring out who all the parents were in this biomed distance learning degree. And I set up a group chat for everyone that had children, because you could sort of see that there were people that didn't have children. Um, and we would text each other, and I would ask a question in some of the online stuff, thinking this is going to sound ridiculous. And then they'd all text on this group chat saying, "I'm so glad you asked that. I'm so glad you asked that." So it's just like, I think with age comes a little bit more courage.
And it's also that confidence in your curiosity as well. As you age a little bit, you are more curious, and well, I wouldn't say you're more curious, but you're more confident to ask the things that you want to know.
Mm,
Whereas you may shy away when you're younger, and you may I think younger people will tend to focus more on what others will think of them, and as you
Yeah,
grow older, you become slightly more carefree.
I think there's less peer pressure when you're older. Definitely.
And I guess when you're younger, because you're also trying to fit in that environment as well. It's a new environment for you. When you go to university, you're trying to make friends. You've got the peer pressure. You've got the different social groups, and you just want to fit in. So you don't want to become an outcast in
Yeah.
whatever way. And so there's a lot of different pressures that students go through. Um, your studies were distance learning. Do you feel you missed out on the university life? The social aspect of it.
No, because I don't think I would have coped very well. I was really reckless when I was younger. So I think the lifestyle may have taken over the actual purpose. Um, However, um, because I did set up a group chat with some of the parents, we got the option to go over to do practical laboratories. So I got to meet with a couple of them and we stayed in the same house. We rented a house and we did practical labs for 2 days. And then when it came to graduation, me and one other person met up with a couple of others and we flew over because we were doing it from all different parts of the UK, Wales, Scotland, Norwich, Southern Ireland, and some of us flew over and actually met up for graduation.
That's quite nice. So you still made friends, even though you may not have been physically together.
Yeah, we still talk as well.
A lot of people that I've spoken to have done, say, an apprenticeship course where you do distance learning in a way as well. And you may just go to university at certain times in the year, either to set exams or do practicals. Most people have said they prefer it that way because of the point where they are in their life. It would either push them off track if they were to go to university, and
Yeah,
also it just allows them to focus because they are no longer focusing on that social aspect of things. They know what they've got to do, and it helps them, maintain that focus. And also, given all the other responsibilities that people have, like yourself, you had children, you could also um, look after those responsibilities too.
I think the apprenticeship route is the best way because you can, as you're learning, you can physically put it into practice. I couldn't think of anything worse than going to university, not having any lab days, not going into a functioning healthcare laboratory, and then trying to like regress 2 years back into one random module in one semester as to what I'm trying to learn 4 years down the line. I could not have that massive gap between the theoretical and the practical, which is why I just think apprenticeships are so they're just like a natural way of learning.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I struggled with, because I went to university, did a master's, then I, spent ages looking for a trainee post. So while I was doing that, I was working as an MLA and a few other jobs in between. And the thing that I struggled with when I got my trainee post and I became a biomedical scientist was that the actual scientific knowledge was no longer there because I'd not used it or put it into practice for so long, I'd forgotten most of my hematology, forgotten most of my transfusion. So I then spoke to my manager and I said, before I get registered, I'd like to do a refresher course in hematology, just so, to brush up on the skills which I've not used for many, many years. Hematology was a module we did in the second year at university. And when I got my registration, it was about 5 years after I'd been to university. And it's a long gap when you've not been using something, it's very easy to forget. So I totally get the point that apprenticeships, I think that is the way going forward. That is what the future of biomedical science study should be.
Mm,
uh, there's lots of other issues that students have. Many students come out with a degree and then they're waiting for that, golden ticket to get the portfolio. And some people wait years and years and years. And it's like the Hunger Games, isn't it? Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes it depends on where you are, and trainee posts come up, but it's not
yes.
easy doing it the
Yeah.
traditional route.
I think it's almost cruel. I really do think it's almost cruel. And it's unsustainable. And I think being on an island, when you have people that are genuinely interested in the job, and then you realise that they've been and done a biomedical degree, but it's not accredited, and then they've got to do like 6 to 10 top up modules to meet the criteria of it being accredited, Then they've got to do the portfolio. And then actually you think, I mean, they'll probably think, why? What? I've done my degree.
Almost like doing another degree if you're doing that with the
Yeah.
top-up modules, isn't it? It's interesting how many other people that I've spoken to from other parts of the world, whenever they're doing the undergraduate degree, working in a lab is an integral part of that, working in a clinical hospital lab, and they have a placement year. So when they come out on the other
Mm,
side, they are registered, as it were, the equivalent, what we would call registered here. And so they go straight into a job working in hospital. And I think, like you said, I think it's unfair in a way that, students here spend 3 years doing a degree, sometimes longer, and they can't even go into a biomedical scientist role. That's one of the issues that I had, because I think at the point when I finished my degree, there wasn't social media, wasn't a big thing. There wasn't biomedical scientists on social media, and so I didn't know much about how to become a biomedical scientist. I finished my degree and I started applying for biomedical scientist roles. I had no idea about the portfolio or or what registration is and how you go about getting it.
yeah.
And I spent ages and ages wondering why I just wouldn't even get an interview for a biomedical scientist job, only to find out that I've got to do this thing called the portfolio before I could do anything. And that was after, 50, 60, 70 applications with no response. And it's quite demoralizing as well. You spent 3 years
Yeah.
of your life doing something to find out actually it's not finished yet. You've got to do something else before you can actually do the career.
It's like hoop jumping. It
Yes,
is a shame. I do a lot of stuff with the career service here, but mainly with the last year of primary age students that are learning about the purpose of a career and it not just being for money and what you find interesting. And it's almost like there needs to be a targeted session delivered to all six forms before these students make the choice so they know what it means to not do an accredited degree.
I think the whole accreditation thing is, degrees that are accredited will advertise and shout about it, but those that aren't will not. I think sometimes it's hard for students to know what the value of an accredited degree is.
Mm.
Now that you've been through that process, what would be some advice you would give to somebody who, in a similar situation to yourself, maybe as a parent, or is considering a career change later on in life? How should they, or what should they be mindful of, and what advice would you give such people?
Ooh, I think when it's later in life and you have parental responsibilities, uh, unfortunately, the main thing is money. Um, can you afford to do this? Can you get can you work alongside doing this at the same time? Because it's no mean feat. It was every evening and at least one of my weekend days once the kids had gone to bed. There was barely, and there was no time in work. So it's about
Yeah,
you
you mentioned money.
yeah, money.
But linked to money is also time, isn't it? Time is also very,
Yeah.
very valuable. And, like you just said, you would spend most of your evenings and even the weekend studying or working. And finding that balance can be quite difficult. People always say money isn't everything, but you need money to live. And without money, it's very, very hard to, do your basic essentials. You need to buy food, pay the bills, and everything else. And then, as a parent, you have to provide for your child or children as well. And so, money is important. It's not the be all and end all of everything, but you have to be mindful of that too.
Yeah, massively. And childcare. Childcare is ridiculously expensive. My children were older. I can't imagine if you had children that were in nursery, how you would be able to financially do it.
How old were your children when you were studying, doing your degree? So when you say
Oh,
older, are you talking teens? Are you talking?
so I started officially it 2017 or 2018? 2018. So it took 5 years. I finished last year. So my youngest was 7 at the time, and my eldest was 13. And the whole journey was, so my eldest, I'd completely finished 3 months after his 18th birthday. So that's what I feel a little bit guilty about. So I didn't miss, I was always present, but his teenage years, his GCSEs, his international baccalaureate, I mean, we were both doing finals at the same time. That was incredibly hard.
I mean, there aren't many parents who can say I was doing exams at the same time as my child. That's a special memory that you're both going to share. You're both doing exams at the same time, and you both passed.
Yeah, yeah, we both did very, very well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Earlier in the conversation, we touched briefly about autism and neurodiversity, and we talked about the stigma associated with it. How or what are some of the misconceptions about autism that people have, and what do you think we as a society can do to become more inclusive for neurodiverse individuals?
My experience is whenever you use terms, um, people straight away think about what you can't do or their perception of what you can't do. Um, and whereas people should just be thinking of the person and not the condition. And it's still a narrative, like I'm constantly banging my head against a brick wall with education, with my daughter. And I'm like, how can I still be doing this? It's 19 years since I had my first child. And he got picked up in nursery before he was 2, but we didn't go down the diagnostic route until he was 4, and then we didn't get a diagnosis for him till he was 7. So the waiting times are crazy, but you sort of think time moves fast, so surely perception should move fast, and it doesn't. People just need to open their minds.
I do feel society is always, a decade or so behind where it needs to be, in terms of, being more inclusive in that regard. Um, you spoke about the diagnosis. Your firstborn was diagnosed when they were 4 years old. What is the process?
So we started the diagnostic process when he was 4, but he didn't get his autism diagnosis till he was 7. And that's because it's a multidisciplinary team that has to diagnose. It can't really just be one person, because obviously that's one person's perception. There's normally a team as well, so you will have either a psychologist, psychotherapist, you'll have an educational psychologist who goes and observes your child in school many times. You'll have a special educational needs coordinator in the school. You'll also have like an autism support worker, and if it's still the same in the UK, like the autism support workers tend to be council, like from the council, but it's also a paediatrician. So you're looking from 4 to 8 professionals that make the judgment call as to whether someone has autism, and it's so many appointments. I cannot even begin to tell you. I cannot remember how many appointments. And it is a little bit torturous, but I can see why they want so many different professionals, because that's a lifetime disability, and people don't like calling it a disability. It is just a different ability, but that's why there has to be so many people involved, because it's needed.
Yeah, as somebody who works in hematology, all of the diagnoses that we make are literally based on one blood test. This is very, very quick, and so this is completely different in that regard because you're looking at the symptoms. If you can call it symptoms, you're looking at the presentation of the patient,
Mm-hmm.
from different viewpoints, from different professionals will, look at the patient. Whereas when you're doing a blood test, say for leukemia, it's just one test, and you can pretty much see it on the blood film, for example. And so it's completely different. And so I understand why it will take so long. In the case of your first one, it took about 3 years, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that I had was about the terminology that we use. Um, I've heard the term autism spectrum disorder and neurodiversity. What do they mean, and what's the difference, if there is a difference between the two, and how are they related?
I can't remember who termed the coin autism spectrum, and that is still one of the main terms for it, ASD. So it still gets called ASD, and they try and define it as a high functioning. So a while ago, high functioning, if you were right at the top of the scale of high functioning, you'd be classed as an old term as Asperger's. So I don't know if you've heard Asperger's. And
Yeah,
if you're high functioning autistic, so one end of the spectrum, you can pretty much function normal, whatever anyone's term of normal is. So you will probably hold down a job, a family. You probably went to mainstream school, and then lower on the spectrum, you have autistic children and adults that are non-verbal, that have to have carers, that can't use the toilet, that can't express themselves. So that's how they term the spectrum, but it almost doesn't work, because you're saying that person who's low on the spectrum isn't very good, and someone who's high functioning, that's great, they're autistic, but they can go out to work or they can go to school, and it's a little bit demeaning still, but they still use the term ASD. And then neurodiversity. So as we know, science goes on and there's more discoveries. Neurodiversity sort of covers, I think it's 9 conditions. So autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, mental health, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. Yeah. So that, I think, are the main types of neurodiversity, but they all overlap. So they all interlink. So the scientific reasoning now is that almost ADHD and autism they're slowly merging to sort of become, I think they call it AUDHD, um, and it because stuff is forever changing, and a lot of people can't get their head around it because they like things to stay the same. Basically, in my mind, because it's easier for them to understand, but it, yeah, it neurodivergence is just people are different in a way in the brain. So I learned recently that if you're a female that's got ADHD, our frontal lobes don't fully develop till we're in our late 30s, which makes a lot of sense with me. I seem to have remained quite immature for a long time, um, but it makes perfect sense to me. And the more I read about it, the more I learn about it, I am obsessed with like neurochemistry. Um, it's really, really fascinating. And also like the comorbidities and the other conditions that are linked to people that have got neurodiversity, like actual physical health conditions.
sure. So, do you think you would ever go down a route of changing your career and moving away from micro and more into the biochemistry side of things to pursue that interest?
Um,
Or is this, say, something you do in your as a
Never say
hobby?
never. Never say never. I think because I've always been quite an advocate for neurodiversity and the importance of just inclusive education. It doesn't take a lot to change how we teach to better work for neurotypical and neurodiverse people. But yeah, never say never, because some of the studies that are coming out of the Netherlands at the moment into neurodiversity are absolutely groundbreaking.
Sure. You spoke about the importance of recognizing um, and celebrating the strengths associated with neurodiversity. How important do you think that is? How important do you think it is that we recognize the different abilities that people have and that we celebrate them. Whenever you watch movies and you see neurotypical individuals represented, it's always very negative.
Yeah, I think it's important whether you're neurodiverse or not, even just to praise people. I don't think that there's a lot of recognition given to people for their strengths, especially if you think about, well, how often do you have an appraisal? Or how often does anyone say, oh gosh, you did that quick, well done, or oh, I don't know how you do that. Like, with neurodiverse people, especially in the laboratory, like, and I've said this on many presentations, our pattern recognition is ridiculous. And I don't know why. And sometimes it's deemed as like a real negative. Like, I don't know, I have this obsession at looking at the error rate on our Kefid machine analyzer, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't add up. Oh, but when you look at this or you look at this module and blah blah blah, and I know people are like, oh, here she goes, she's picking at faults again, and it isn't. It's like well, actually, if we could audit this or if we could look at this, then maybe there's a pattern, and then maybe we could do this, so troubleshooting for neurodiverse people is just a gift.
A lot of auditing is about pattern recognition, isn't it? You look at, where things don't work the way you want them to work, or where they work in a certain way. Say, every Wednesday the analyzer goes off, and until somebody actually recognizes the pattern, you won't know what remedial actions you can take or how you can improve the process. So, like you mentioned, it is a gift in a way to be able to see those patterns where other people may not even notice them or just think it's a coincidence.
Yeah.
So the next question I was going to ask you was about, the skills that you have developed over time. And I think you've partially answered this in the pattern recognition that you spoke about. Do you find any overlap between the skills such as patience required for working in the lab and also the skills needed to parent children with autism?
Patience. And it's taken me a long time, not the patience, but silent observation. So giving yourself however many seconds it takes to just step back and then react. Because if you react out of anger with your children, it creates a horrible, intense emotional response from them. But then if you do that in the lab, that's a confined environment as well. And you're creating an atmosphere for everybody else, not just the individual you're having that interaction with, but anyone else that's in the vicinity. So there's a really good crossover between the two. But I think parenting children with autism makes you become immensely self-aware of how you react to situations, because they are so multifaceted. You can give them an exam paper and they will read a language-based question and they will come out with a completely different answer because of how they've interpreted the language. But when you get your head around how they've interpreted the language in that question based on how you would, and then you think about it, you think, oh God, yeah, actually, you could mean that. And then you confuse yourself. That's where it gets really tricky. Because then you start doubting yourself. Then you're like, oh, actually, these kids are really clever. Are they mine?
I think sometimes we don't give children enough justice and we don't celebrate just how smart they can be at times, because I guess it comes with age, doesn't it? You become blinkered in your view of things as you grow older, maybe due to experience and your life, what you've seen throughout your lifetime. But children are still learning and they're still developing, and so they don't have those blinkers. And so when they read something or see something, they interpret it in a way which we may not even think about now. It may not have even crossed our minds. And so,
Yeah,
I have this thing with my niece. She's always asking me questions. So I'm like, why didn't I ever think of that? And an example of that is, for instance, a few months ago, the sun came out. And in London, it's known to be rainy all the time. And she's like, Uncle, well, why is the sky blue today? And I was like, what? What do you mean, why is it blue? The sky is blue. But what I forgot was she's only seen it when it's grey. And
Mm.
so for her, grey is the normal. So when she said, why is it blue? I didn't realize that for her, the norm was grey sky. And, didn't even cross my mind to think of that.
Children are so fascinating, and that's why, like, I think it's so important to get younger people into the lab. And I think it's important that when you do get work experience students, or when you do get trainee biomedical scientists, whatever, whoever's younger, it's really important to have appraisals with them and to ask them, do you have any ideas what could make things run better? Do you have any feedback about what your experience has been like here? What do you think would help someone else coming up through the bottom up? Um, I don't think we do enough of that because I think people make the assumption, oh, you're young, you're new, you don't know anything. Actually, like, the younger generation are so attuned to empathy nowadays, and they're very good with knowing right from wrong, I believe.
I think a sign of a good and healthy workplace is where everyone's voice is heard and where you're willing to make changes as well. And so sometimes it takes a fresh pair of eyes to notice something which has been the way since time immemorial, because it's always
Yeah.
been the way we've done this. And it takes somebody new, maybe could be younger, could be older, to use their fresh pair of eyes to say, actually, what if we did it this way? And I think, a place which allows staff members to have that opinion, to input that opinion, it might be that, sure, we may not adopt it as a lab, but it was good to listen to it and to consider it. It also gives staff the confidence to share things as well, which they may not otherwise do so.
Mm. I think it's important that people feel heard as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the good things that I noticed in one of the labs that I worked is every week they used to have a shout out. And so throughout the company, you'd get an email and people could, write a shout out for somebody in the lab, somebody they'd worked with, a colleague, for something they'd done which they appreciated, whether it's something small, like, covering a shift, or something bigger, like they fixed something, and it made you feel appreciated. And it's the little things like that which go a lot further than, say, for instance, a pizza once every three
Yeah.
years.
Every
You
three
know,
years. It's just gratitude, isn't it?
yeah,
It doesn't happen often enough.
yeah,
Kind words are a lot more than a freebie.
definitely. They stay with you a lot longer, and I think they increase your bonding with your colleagues too. If you share kind words and you share positive things, it brings you closer as well. Whereas if you just come in, do your work, you're a bit snarky all day and don't speak to anyone, then there's always that tension you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of kind words and the importance of caring for each other, how important do you think self-care is for parents in similar situations that you were, and how did you manage to find the time for yourself? Like you mentioned, you were always studying in the evenings and even on weekends. So how did you go about caring for yourself?
I did think that I lost myself quite a bit. I did after COVID. Uh, I did get quite depressed, and I was out of work for 4 months, 3 or 4 months. Really took its toll on me. Studying, working around the clock because we had to learn PCR testing from scratch. And I think at the times when it first started, there were only five of us, and we literally did get worked to the bone, and it was absolutely ridiculous. And I actually felt like we got zero recognition at all in the laboratory, which is a real shame because makes it really sour. And I became unwell because I was juggling so much, and then I ended up having to have an operation on my arm from all the COVID testing. So I now have a metal pin in my arm. So there was quite a lot of resentment, but I think I needed the whole big blowout and to become unwell to realise how much I had neglected myself. So in order to get better, I ended up just walking, and I would walk and walk and walk. Um, sometimes I wouldn't even know where I was going. Um, but being out in nature was the best way for me to sort of heal a little bit, have a bit of headspace. And then after returning to work, over the past 2 years, I've learned how to incorporate boundaries. And that is very hard for a lot of people to take when you have previously been a person with no boundaries and would dedicate yourself to everything and work every extra hour. But now you have boundaries, you will stick up for yourself and you know what your rights are because you realise that by not being like that, you ended up not well.
I think COVID was a difficult time for lots of people for lots of different reasons, and everyone has got their own story about what COVID, did to them in a way. And you turned into a lady with a metallic arm, which is so cool. Um, you may not think it, but I think it sounds amazing. Um, but at the time, it must have been it must have been quite difficult, and not to make light of the situation, but if you were to go back, I know they say it's always easier in hindsight. Would there be anything that you would change differently on your journey?
No, because I don't believe in regrets. I think that everything that ever goes wrong is just a lesson. So no, because I wouldn't have learned. I wouldn't have learned to take a bit more control over my own life and have a bit more of a say of what I should and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah. So you mentioned boundaries previously. How important do you think they are in your work life and your personal life to set those boundaries and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, whether it's agreeing to do overtime?
Massively important. And I used to think, because we've all had times where we had opinions, and on reflection, they were the wrong opinions to have. And I used to think when younger staff had boundaries, younger than me, and would say, I'm not doing that, I'm not doing that, I used to think, oh wow, they're actually quite entitled. And actually, that's not entitlement. That's looking out for yourself. You know, I, you're meant to work 37.5 hours a week, and you've been asked to come in on the weekend, and it's not actually your turn, and it's like, no. Being assertive and protecting yourself isn't being entitled.
Do you think, or how would you advise somebody who struggles to say no and to make those boundaries? Because sometimes, as we all know, labs can be very short-staffed, uh, so you don't want to feel like you're not a team player. So how do you say no, or how do you say, I can't do it today, maybe some other day?
I think it's always ask a question. So always say, is there a reason you're asking me first if they're asking them first? Because I'm telling you, 9 times out of 10, if people are asking you first, it's because they know you're an easy target. And then I would say, have you asked anybody else? Because you're not being rude, you're just putting it out there. And then it's okay to just say no. But then in some circumstances, you don't have to say why you're saying no if it's extra on top of. But feel free to say no because I think it's detrimental to my health. I think it's detrimental to my well-being. Or I'm contracted to these hours, and unfortunately, I can't do any more. I don't want to become unwell and then maybe next week not be able to turn up to my actual contracted shift and then have to go down as sick because ultimately they don't want that either.
Anything extra that you do is extra. You don't have to do it, and that's
Yeah,
something to keep in mind. If you can, that's great, but it's not something that anyone can force you to do either.
no.
To wrap things up, what final message would you share with some of the listeners, especially those who might be in a similar situation to yourself?
Keep swimming, which is a bit cliche from Finding Nemo, but just keep trying, but put your hand up if you are struggling, because at the end of the day, the only person you're going to harm is yourself. And I've learned that the hard way. And make sure that you know what you can access. Make sure you know what support is out there. Make sure, even like with the IBMS, a lot of people still don't realise that there's like the assistance program where there's a phone number that you can phone if you need to speak to anybody. And network. Networking's a really good thing, because I have so many people that I can chat to if I need to, if I want to ask a micro question, if even if it sounds ridiculous, I'm not going to get judged. So network, prioritize self-care, and know what your rights are.
Okay. And looking forward, what are your future goals? Do you see yourself always working in microbiology? Do you have other plans, or what are you thinking, both professionally and personally?
Um, I've got my MSc, so I'm finishing my first year of my MSc next week.
Awesome.
Um, so short term is to finish my MSc. Um, Hopefully once this goes out, I will be doing my remote lecturing for Nottingham Trent University, which is another challenge that I wanted to try, and I passed the interviews, so that was good. So I don't really want to um, wish too far in the future. I want to try and live in the present. So yeah, trying to get through my MSc and just trying to spend as much time with my family as I can, because I'm getting old and the kids are getting older.
Sure. I mean, you don't look it at all. I would have said you were no older than 25, to be honest.
Oh,
Um,
that's really kind. I'm the big 4-0 in a month, in less than a month.
how quickly time flies, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And only you can say this, but your kids have grown up so quickly. It might have been just yesterday when they were born, and now, I think you said when you were doing your final exams, your firstborn turned 18. He's an adult
Mm,
himself now, and he's
yeah.
navigating his way through life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you and learning about, how you got to where you are today, your challenges that you faced and how you dealt with them head on. Thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you for asking.
No worries.